evening, everybody. I'm Tim, this is Matt, and we thought we'd take an opportunity here on the topic of cybersecurity, since we're in New York City, to talk to the man himself about how an organization of, I guess we'll call it 300,000 people, if we count everybody on the New York City employee side, gets it done in security. And Matt came on to a new role a couple years ago in forming the Office of Technology Innovation, Mayor Adams coming on board, and announcing he wanted to consolidate all of technology, all departments across the whole city, which is quite a few, we'll hear about some, under one leader in one organization and kind of unified threat defense, so to speak. That leaves Matt with 300,000 people with help desk, desktop, the mundane day-to-day, all the way up to things like complex joint security operations center with the state and federal agencies that some of you I'm sure have read about. So I wanted to kick off and just kind of ask you about, I'll call it a new role, but it's a couple of years now, and the complexity, scope, scale, what's your team look like? I mean, what are you managing out there every day?
Yeah, it's first of all, good morning, everyone. All right, good morning. So I think when you look at what we did at the start of the administration, one of the big challenges that we had when we looked at technology as a city is that you couldn't understand or you could not pinpoint what technology looked like. So you couldn't say technology leadership, you couldn't say technology program, strategy. Every agency, if you look at the city as a whole, over 100 separate entities make up the city, and each one of those entities had its own tech league. So as we stepped in, we said, we want to make big transformational change. We want to make sure that as the mayor has a strategy, we can make those things happen, but we can't do that if we have 100 voices that we have to wrangle. We have to bring those together into one vision. So the Office of Tech and Innovation is the city's tech authority. It's the city's information privacy authority, the city's cyber authority, the city's franchise authority, and if it smells or looks like tech, it belongs in the Office of Tech and Innovation. And what we've done is we've established a federated approach where we allow agencies to build strategies that are specific to their mission, but we bring them all together and we align them to make sure that as a city invests, we invest in ways that make sense, that furthers the city's holistic mission. A very good example of that is when you look at big purchasing, all right, or artificial intelligence strategies. One of the things that we've done recently is we've launched our AI action plan. It's saying that we as a city will continue to embrace artificial intelligence, but we want to make sure that as we do it in ways that complement each other, but also ways that the public expects us to. We don't want to use our citizen data in ways that they don't expect, and we don't want to infringe in privacies in ways that they don't expect. So by having one strategy that governs how every agency moves forward, it's a way that we can wrap our arms around things.
Yep. Some of us were living in New York 9/11. Did that catalyze the city? We think about New York City today, and it's very advanced. It's obviously larger than a lot of small countries. And is that still there? And does that help budget dollars? Does that help catalyze, employees, managers, leaders, the city, you think, culturally?
So 9/11 was a very interesting point, not just for New York City, but for the nation. One of the things that we noticed in New York City was that we weren't very well coordinated between the public and private sector. We treated crime as a thing that happened, and we just dealt with the things and the conditions that we saw out in the street. And we didn't really focus a lot with big business or on a national security level to see how we dealt with that. Out of 9/11, an interesting concept was sparked, and it's called the Lower Manhattan Security Initiative. And what that focuses on is taking sensor data that exists in the private sector. So for example, you look at places like Goldman Sachs, you look at JP Morgan, you look at other places like Fraser that has massive amounts of real estate in the city. They also have a bunch of sensory assets that are around that real estate. Cameras, in some cases, chem sensors, radiation sensors, things that are coming in and out of their building or around their buildings. So after 9/11, we built a program, the Lower Manhattan Security Initiative, which focused on bringing all those assets into one umbrella. So now the New York City Police Department, working in conjunction with the private sector, has access to over 70,000 cameras across the city, license plate readers, chem sensors, radiation sensors, and it gives us the ability to respond much quicker to incidents as they're happening. And also, when we have a potential threat around terror, it gives us a better sense of where those individuals may be, and they be able to disrupt that terror as much as possible. The stories that you hear about what happens are the things that fall through the cracks, but you don't hear the millions of stories that don't happen. And the reason why we've been more successful of late at preventing incidents like that is because of that public-private partnership and sharing information where we can. Very similar to that, that's what we've done in the cyber perspective to bring that at the level that we treat physical security.
Yeah, we talk about asymmetry in cybersecurity all the time, and you have to win 1,000%, and 1,000, and the bad guys only have to break through here and there. So it makes it tough. Since you broached the topic of private companies, I've heard it said that 80 to 90% of what we think about as critical infrastructure is actually controlled in the corporate sector, and I'm sure you gave a couple New York examples. How do you reach out to other businesses? I'm sure that you mentioned some big ones that are in your loop, but you've got tech leaders here, small and large entrepreneurial companies. How do they get involved with either New York or their cities and states?
Yeah, so that number is about right. 80 to 90% of what we consider critical, it's in the private sector. I mean, the public sector, things like your traffic lights, sanitation, in some cases we control. But other things like your grocery stores, your hospitals, your health clinics, your banks, most of the things that the average person considers critical is outside of government control. So we've worked very closely with programs like LMSI where we reach out proactively to the private sector, which is both in real estate, which is in energy, which is in finance, and a bunch of other areas so that we can proactively pull those people in. Now in the cybersecurity space, since the start of the administration in February of last year, we launched a Joint Security Operations Center. And one of the things that we wanted to push is that cybersecurity isn't something that one individual can do on its own. It's a practice of community. And if we only look at it from what we can see as a government perspective, we miss looking at the things, 90% of what people consider to be critical. So as part of our Joint Security Operations Center, we focused on a whole of government approach by bringing both New York City and the surrounding cities and the state under one operation center. In addition to that, we've worked with our federal partners. So in the same center, we have a presence from the FBI and the other three-letter agencies. And then we have our local and state police that sit there. Now when an incident occurs, we can have one coordinated approach to what's happening. So from a threat perspective, New York City is about, our attack surface is over 1 million endpoints, and we have over 3,000 square miles of fiber in the ground. So it's a lot of connectivity, a lot of places to attack. On a weekly average, we see about 100 billion cyber events, right? In terms of visibility and attack surface, we see more attacks than big tech, we see more attacks than finance. It's significant. And the only entity that has anything close to that too, based on what we can see, is US Army Cyber Command. So the next phase of the Joint Security Operations Center is allowing businesses that operate in New York to subscribe and join in. So that also means that when you subscribe, what's the value proposition? Offering tool sets like EDR, right? Once you subscribe, we have a common EDR that we'll push out. Offer you SIM services and also offer you assistance from a SOC that operates 24/7. On most companies that are starting up, most companies that are mid-sized or small may not have the resources that are necessary to operate a 24/7 security operations center focused on cybersecurity. Being able to leverage a joint one so that you can get that economy of scale is one of the things that we want to offer. In addition to that, one of the big things that we're focused on is training and making sure that as entities grow in this space, they know how to protect themselves. So we're also building a public curriculum and an apprentice program where we can bring people in. And if you have a resource or two that you want to give so they can build dexterity in the space, they can do that.
I was going to ask you a little more about that because I've heard about the academy. You got to train cyber experts. You need your frontline staff, but then city employees too. And I guess it sounds like at least awareness level for residents. So just tell us a little more about that academy. I think I was reading about it. I thought it was very unique.
Yeah. So one of the big challenges that we have is government. It's not as big of a challenge for the private sector, but cybersecurity is one of those areas where resources are in high demand. So on the government end, imagine you bring people in that come in at an apprentice level, you build them up. One of the things that we have a big challenge is in terms of wage competitiveness. Private sector tends to pay a lot more than the public sector can pay, but the people who tend to gravitate towards the public sector gravitate more towards mission. But we found ourselves in this cycle where we're perpetually losing cyber talent. You invest a lot, you get folks trained up, And as they get mature, they sort of gravitate out of the system. But we couldn't be in a place where we try to attract that same talent back because, again, cost of living, wage, there's a number of things that we won't be able to actually compete against.
That's right.
So what we decided to do is treat cybersecurity like we treat our police force. Every couple of months, every 3 months, there's a police force, there's a police class that comes into the police academy, and within a couple of months they graduate and they're police officers. Why not have the same capability from cybersecurity? So we've worked with places like, our partners like Mandiant, Cisco, CrowdStrike, in building a curriculum where we could bring people in and over a 6-month span, get them up to speed to be a cyber analyst like any one of those companies would hire. And by doing that, we've created a pipeline so that we can continuously crank out cyber talent and distribute them across the city. Now, we're working in conjunction with a number of other training partners so we can continue to build that talent and have that talent pool live in New York City. So as companies continue to grow in New York, they have cyber talent that's local here. And you can get resources from a pool that's been vetted.
That makes sense. It's not just government. I was running a public cybersecurity company, and very difficult to get talent. And we came to the same conclusion. And starting with our CISO, one person, we grew it to 60 people, and most of those were internal, either engineers or other people that just showed a passion and ended up learning. So I think that's an important lesson for everybody here. It's a very short list of companies where a cybersecurity expert says, I want to go there.
Yep.
They're all going to be facing that same challenge in the end. You mentioned AI, you mentioned critical infrastructure. Let me pivot over there. We've had a decade, and you've seen the numbers, I think a lot of people here, a decade of just explosion in malware, ransomware. I like to say the bad guys have a business model now. And it seemed to me it's the confluence of 3 trends. One is we've digitized our whole life. The paperless office is finally here, 30 years after the term. We have connected ourselves globally. So I can check my bank account in London from here, but that means the bad guys conceptually can too. Yep. So we're all on the internet. And the third one is crypto, which if you're a fan or not a fan, you have to acknowledge it exists, and ransomware is paid in a very certain form. So looking forward, it strikes me that critical infrastructure, what I would call physical attacks, we saw Colonial Pipeline, we're starting to see proper disruption of major segments of the economy is a big area, and you deal with that. And then you mentioned AI, which, if you didn't think it was here now, it's here. Yep. How are those going to play, both good and bad? I mean, offense and defense, in your mind, you've spent a lot of time on it.
Yeah, so I think for us, we as a community have to get better at proper hygiene. And I think that's, when you look at most of the incidents that we see, whether it's Colonial Pipeline, or whether it's Nissan Renault, Saudi Aramco, a lot of the issues that we saw in terms of these big ransomware attacks, especially in the manufacturing or utility space. Historically, your IT network and your OT network have been viewed as 2 completely separate different networks. And your OT network, because of manufacturing times and operations times, you can't afford to bring those things offline. So what happens as a result is you have all of these massive networks that control a lot of infrastructure that have not been updated in years. So then you find a ransomware variant that's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years old, or something else that's malicious. Someone plugs in the wrong thing, and all of a sudden it's propagating across an entire network. So in terms of proper hygiene, figuring out ways that we can maintain those OT networks the same way we maintain our IT networks, patching, updating, and visibility. One of the big things that we wanted to do when we created the Joint Security Operations Center was we said we couldn't afford to treat OT as a separate thing. So we had to bring in all of the sensor data, all of the telemetry, everything that operated on that network into a common pane of glass. So when I looked at the city's threat landscape, I could say, you know what, it's more than just what I can see on the IT side. We've got this massive gap here. Yep. And although we can't have the same tolerances to bring those networks down, we can do things like put compensating controls in place to make sure that as something arose, we had the ability to coordinate, contain, disrupt, and restore, right? And in many cases, we've had a lot of success over the last couple of years about that. But when you look at artificial intelligence and what that brings, I think on the social engineering front, we've got a higher probability that we're going to see that vector being exposed within the next couple of years, where people are using chatbots to fish information out, get passwords, harvest credentials, and then use that as some sort of attack vector. Beyond that, I think in terms of what we're seeing in the tech space, artificial intelligence will continue to play a role in security as it has. Like I said, we have about 100 billion cyber events that we see weekly, but we take those 100 billion events, we put them through our system, and we turn that into less than 50 things that someone looks at during any given week. And AI plays a large part of that, identifying what's a risk, what's not, and responding in some cases faster than a human can. So I think for us, the biggest thing that we can focus on is proper hygiene, visibility, and making sure that we have compensating controls in the right place.
Yeah, you've been doing this a long time, so have I. I mean, I saw the recent CISA top 10 list.
Yep.
You kind of go, oh, we're still not doing it. We're still not patching. Yeah. We're still using Windows 2000 in the corner, and you're just the more it gets connected again. There you go, right? And I think that's a lesson for everybody too. Like we titled this talk, "Everyone Owns Security," in part to reflect that everybody in the audience, board members, frontline managements, if you don't bring it to the table, if the CFO is not giving you the budget, then if you don't build it in almost from the beginning, you think about Six Sigma and manufacturing quality, that was the lesson. And so many of these we just saw. I think it got personal earlier this week with SolarWinds, where the SEC suing SolarWinds on an attack that just won't leave the news because it was so pervasive. But they also sued the CISO, and so it's starting to get personal for C-suite executives as well if you're not on top of this. And I think that's likely to continue. So in all these frameworks you mentioned, and I want to close with kind of culture and governance, the 2.0 version of the NIST framework comes back. It looks a lot like 1.0, except it has governance on top of it, right? Goldman Sachs was actually a partner of ours on security development using the building security and maturity model that they and Microsoft have really pioneered. And all of these things talk about education, culture, you mentioned awareness. Like, just give us a sense of where you've come over the last 2 years and where you think you go next. I think you started off saying it's a community problem.
Yeah, so one of the things that we focused on and that we'll continue to focus on is the whole of community approach to cyber and security as a whole. If you speak to your infrastructure teams, they're focused on building things as quick as they can so they can be as efficient as they can. If you speak on your application development teams, they want to build apps as quick as they can on any platform that they can that can yield the results that they want. And then if you speak to both of those teams together and you ask them their opinion about security, they're like, oh, those are the no police. They come out to say no to everything. Like, we can't do this, we can't do that. So I think that one of the things that when we say a whole of society approach to security, that takes place in the tech world, making sure that we communicate with each other as we're building to layer security in at the beginning. It's like, what are you trying to build? Bring the CISO, bring the security team in so that we can build those things together as a team. Now, reaching out to the people that have the access to the technology and training those folks up. We've started a lot of campaigns that are focused on social engineering, reaching out, calling our constituents saying, hey, this is John from the help desk. Can you give me a password so we can reset it? And we started with our C-suite because those are the folks that have the most access. Of
course.
And you'd be surprised how many of them actually gave information out.
Oh, I wouldn't.
Yeah, it's great, scary stuff. So we started with, leveling up the training that we've done and actually turning that into practical exercises. Because you can send as much video training and tests out that you want. People will listen in the moment, but it isn't until they actually feel the impacts of something before they learn their lessons. Yeah. So I think for us, working on the tech side, building in that dexterity, anytime you build, bring the security team in, make sure they work with you, and working with our folks outside to make sure that anytime they touch technology, they're aware of the risk and they protect themselves in the best ways they can.
I suspect you and I will be up here in 10 years because this problem's not going away. When I moved to New York 30 years ago, from Illinois, a small town, I remember there were 4 locks on my apartment door and I couldn't figure out that whole thing. But it drives home that security and convenience are always going to be an inverse relationship. And it sounds like we're going to have to maintain a higher level of inconvenience in order to keep ourselves protected broadly.
Well, I hope that we're a little bit better than that. But if you look at the rate that technology's expanded since I was a kid forward, and the fact that although we see cyber threats and risks and attacks grow significantly, we're also seeing more access deployed. Yeah. So if you measure the amount of access that's given versus the amount of attacks that we see, of course it's going to go up. Right. but it seems like people are getting much smarter with technology these days.
Net positive.
Net positive, net positive.
I'm glad we could have the conversation. Any closing thoughts for the group here?
It's just, I think as we look at the next phase of cyber, or the next frontier for cyber, this approach of bringing all your information together, working collaboratively as a team across sectors, across industry, it's going to be vital. Because what we see on the law enforcement end, right, or on the government end, is there are many times where an attack is targeting a specific segment of industry, a specific sector, and then all of a sudden it becomes prevalent in other places. That could be avoidable. So being able to identify those information as quickly as possible and working together as a community so that we can enrich the community, I think it's going to be a key part of how we determine success in the future. Like our adversaries and the folks that are working actively against us, they're well coordinated and they communicate very well. It may be on backroom chat channels, it may be on the dark web, however they communicate, but when you look at some of the attack sophistication that exists, it's done well. And the only way we can abate those kind of things is if we do it together. One of the things that you mentioned was SolarWinds. Like SolarWinds taught us as an industry across that even at your best, you are not better than how they operate. So unless we communicate and we share those experiences together, we'll never be able to keep up with the way that they're moving in that pace. So I'm hopeful that conversations like this, the community that we're continuing to build, can continue to make the security landscape much safer. You know the term iron sharpens iron? Yeah. I think we sharpen each other and make this side of the world much better.
Well, good. I'm glad you're there on the front lines. So thanks for the chat.
All right. Thank you all very much.
All right. Thank you.